When there is the shift in non-duality, how does it affect the person? What a boring title, Lisa. So first of all, let's establish what non-duality is. So if this is your first time on the talk, then I will explain to you in 1 minute what non-duality is. So humanity is hypnotized into stories. So we have a thinking mind, and this thinking mind tells us stories about life and about who we are. And then it creates a world in which we live in. It starts off small. So when you're young, the stories are small and simple. Me, dad, mum, mine. And then the stories get more and more complex. And we can imagine more and more things. And whatever stories we tell ourselves, so whatever we imagine, then becomes an energetic expression in the body. So if you imagine something horrible, then that manifests in your body. If you imagine yourself as stuck, then that manifests in the body. If you imagine yourself as a good person, then that manifests in the body. A better person, a right person. And it all plays. So it's like a film playing, and there's something that watches it. There's something that's experiencing it, but that something seems to become enmeshed in the story, and then it's believed that you are the story, that you are the person in the story. So it's like there is something watching the stories told about you and your life, and then the audience member, the one that's watching the film, dives in and then feels like that's who you truly are. Who you are is the stories formed in your head. And that combination of the ability to tell stories, the ability to navigate our experience through time and through thinking and through space, that creates a very successful, you could say, hunter and gatherer race. It's very successful at surviving, but it creates suffering because it first of all makes your stories deviate in strange ways. Like you can get lost in stories around shame or guilt or blame or hatred. And it believes things that aren't true. So it believes, first of all, that you are somebody sitting there listening to somebody sitting here. So that's the first misconception. And it believes that to be true rather than just a description that's happening in time of what seems to be happening, but is taken as fact. So that's one thing. The next thing that happens is that you believe that you're responsible for your life, responsible for your actions, responsible for what you do, what others do, how happy you are, how unhappy you are. And then it sort of creates all these like cobweb legs, or cobwebs in a way. No, not cobwebs, like spider legs, octopus's legs, but like thousands of them that go into abstract storytelling. Like stress about you and what you've got to do and your responsibility of life, your fear of death, your fear of life, your fear of others. So it becomes immense, the story of you. It becomes a heavy burden, which the Buddha described as suffering, and that's what I would also call suffering. So suffering is the identification with the person. And once the suffering's begun, so once there is the identification with the person, another layer starts called seeking. So then the person tries to undo itself and undo that discomfort of you through seeking things in time and through seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And this is where it gets really complex, because our instruments are going to be conditioned. And our instruments, which I mean the body when I say our instruments, they're going to be conditioned, and they're going to be moving towards pleasure and avoiding pain. But seeking is like another dimension to that. It's like this agitation that you're never in the right place, you're never at home, you're always in the wrong place, and you always need to be somewhere else. It's like an agitation and a contraction. But just note that everything I say is only pointing to this subject. It's not actually truth either. My teaching is also a story which isn't fact, just like the story of you isn't fact. It's something that's going in time, which is trying to point to the timeless, and never can. And it can't all be articulated correctly. So, and that's not just me. I'm not just going to fall on my own sword and be like, that's just me. I can't articulate it right. I see it in everything, in every teaching. And so I kind of like it that people that listen to me listen to other speakers as well, and that you get multiple inputs, and that you can hold that as well, that there's not a right teaching or a wrong teaching. Often we can't hold that. Often we have to have sameness, otherwise it creates chaos. We feel chaotic, we feel out of control, and it feels like maybe you lost something, or it's not about me saying that that this message is wrong. It's that all messages can never capture this. You're never going to be able to get this in time. You're always going to fail, and I mean that really humbly. So if you go off on the bandwagon like, this is right, it won't last for long, because there is no truth in time. There is the timeless, which is your only truth. It's what you truly are. And I like to really split this up now. Firstly, the difference between who you truly are and the human. Because the human does change when you have awakening. So it is going to change, and it is going to transform. But the goal of awakening is not to become a perfect human. That's always what you've dreamt of, is becoming the perfect human, and that's not going to be what you get. That's your dream, that's your fantasy that has to be let go of. It really has to be let go of, because you're never going to make it. It's a seeking. So but there is this shift that can happen where there is this recognition of timelessness, and then the person is moving in that, and that stops the seeking in the person. So there's no longer the seeking to get things, but it doesn't stop the dynamics and the habits and the conditioning. So you could feel fear because one of your partners is really, or a friend of yours is really abusive to you. So you could have this recognition, be really spacious and free, but there could be fear about someone being abusive to you, and then there could be action taken by that, and then there could be like going to therapy and releasing that trauma. There could be reflecting on that trauma, reflecting on what led you to that trauma to recondition you. So it's not that. What we get into in this search, and what will be your biggest distraction, is actually trying to become the perfect person. So I say all of this because it to me is super important that we define these two different dynamics. The seeking will stop because you found home, but your body's still going to be conditioned, and your body's still going to have habits and conditionings of that seeking. So I can see with me there's old seeking patterns that come up, but that bundle of energy that's seeking inside of you stops. It's an energetic shift, it really is. And then what happens after you have this energetic shift is that it takes years, maybe lifetimes and lifetimes, for that energy to work itself out, because like as humanity, you're as progressive as your society. So you're as free as your society. You're free as your family system. Like a human isn't separate from that which it's living in. Like all of us have blood on our hands for so many things, all of us in our society, the things that we do. And we all have to wear that. We can say, oh, the government should change it, but we as a collective fight and vote for our governments mostly. I mean, most countries also don't do that, but it's still a manifestation of our current society. Even if you've got dictatorship, there's a manifestation there of that from that society. Otherwise there would be a rebellion about it, whether it's got a victim mentality or whatever it is that's happening. And even if people con you into things or whatever it is, we still have to own that we're all part of this society, this money system, and this money system really isn't fair. It really isn't okay what we do with trade and with animals, but it's what our current system is. And I think the greatest political activism that you can ever do is wake up, because this changes things energetically. Like when people have had this shift, you can feel their energy. There is an energetic difference in them. It doesn't always mean that their actions will be different, because they're going to be responding to their environment, and they're also going to have habits and conditions. So maybe sometimes they do shitty things, but energetically there's a shift there, which is the beginning point to changing society. So it's really important that you don't get into your mind that becoming a perfect person is waking up, because you'll be seeking forever. That isn't the same thing. What I do teach, though, is that often the person goes through a process of settling everything down for that realization to happen. So it goes through doing yoga training, breathing, chakra work, aura work, meditation, psychology, all these different things. But it's not the destination, because so I say that, and then so firstly, it's really important for me to clarify that for teaching purpose, in the sense of for you to not get fake or false ideas or false hopes, even though maybe you do hope that you change a lot. More than likely you will, because of all the settling down of the character, and the shift more than likely will change things as well. But it could make you more grumpy if you've been really repressed. So it might not be like you envisage it. So you've got that. Number one, the teaching. Number two, because teaching about personality traits. And number 3, because I personally want to have a clear conscience to make sure that everybody that listens to me knows that I am by and far a perfect person. So if you've got any guru tendencies or tendencies to project the perfect mother or the perfect father even onto me, the perfect lover, then I'm really not. But I make myself sound really bad. I think from what I've come from, I think I've done a really good job at shifting a lot of Lisa's karma, but I still make mistakes, can be rude to people, lose my temper, say inappropriate things, be reactive, be afraid, act out of fear. I don't tend to have hatred, ever, actually. Maybe that's one thing I can say, but that, who knows? But I don't tend to, I mean, who knows about that? Maybe there's some big well under there that I haven't released yet. It's like waiting, and I'm like, Rah! But I did have a lot of that in my shifts, but I don't tend to ever have hatred. I can have anger, but really not hatred towards people. I can have jealousy, all of these things. What else is there? Something that I did this morning where I said, yes, Lisa does. Oh yeah, I feed my partner's cheese to the dog, and he's asked me so many times not to do that. And that's so shitty that I do it. I can't, that's really like, it doesn't mean I'm not being passive aggressive to him, that I'm conscious of. It sounds like a passive aggressive action. It's more like she comes up to the fridge and she's so excited because she can smell cheese in there. And I give it to her. That sounded very dirty, Lisa. I give it to her. I give her the cheese, you know, and I can get hurt by comments that people make on YouTube, particularly if they're like very male aggressive. It frightens me sometimes. So, and I think it's also really, really healthy and important that a teacher continuously does that to break the projections of perfection. I think that you get into some very weird psychological games if people play the guru as if they on the human level have arrived at something. And I'm sure at points I have played that with people, and in the beginning, because that was the way I was trained in, like the guru thing. So, but over the years I've realized that game is a psychological dynamic that's unhealthy, and an energetic dynamic that's unhealthy, of like trying to get something from someone and someone sitting up there having something. So, because if you imagine it, so in day-to-day life, like I don't even really tell people that much if I'm feeling really happy inside, because it's like, imagine telling people that you had like $1 million. You just wouldn't do that. I'll say it if people ask, I feel good, or I say this, but, and it's, you know, it's not something to be talked about. It has to be talked about in this situation, because otherwise how can I teach? But I do feel good a lot of the time. Like energetically, I feel this spaciousness, but that to me is the connection to source. And on the human level, I have quite good feelings often, but that doesn't have to be the way if you have this awakening. You could have very dense, difficult human body. But there is this other part that's always free. So let's go back to non-duality again. So when I'm talking about all of this, like most people are really identified with who they are or who the other is. And when it's really important to you who you are, then it's really important who the other is. Whereas you don't know who you are right here, right now. So the character is something that's appearing and disappearing, which is habits and conditions and stories. But it's so flexible and it's always changing. Your character changes the mood you're in, the people you're around, what you like, what you don't like, what you've done or what you haven't done, or what you're doing. If you have confidence, your character is always changing. When you're being sexual, funny, all those different types of things. So it's something that's in flow, but it's got patterns. So all of us have patterns of ways of being. But the society is so eager to believe that's me, and I've got to be good. I've got to be better than. I mustn't be shameful. I mustn't let my family down. I mustn't let people down. I've got to be something. And there's so much focus on that and seeking on that. And then there is this narrow contraction of consciousness in the I am. So it feels like that consciousness and I am is locked into that body. Whereas who you are is absolute spaciousness. This immense spaciousness, right here, right now, that's timeless, that cares about nothing. It doesn't reject or accept. And then there's this I am, or this love to it. And none of it rejects or accepts anything. It just is. It's just there. You could call it acceptance, like it's embracing everything, but it's not really an act of acceptance. It's just there. What you are now is just here. It doesn't have any judgment. If you've done good things, it doesn't think, wow, what a good person. Like goodness is godliness or something. It doesn't think that. And if you're a bad person, which is so beautiful. I know it might be annoying to people that have done all these good things and think they're closer to something, but it really doesn't accept or reject anybody more. Its arms are held out. And it's really not getting lost in this idea that you have to be better than what you are. That you shouldn't be shameful, that you shouldn't be bad, that you have to be something more. There's nothing more you have to be from consciousness's perspective. The human can evolve, that's what it does. It can get better at things, it can become nicer and more expanded and kinder. But consciousness is never affected. So consciousness never rejects anything. And consciousness isn't a thing. So when you really go into the depth of it, consciousness is everything. You could even say there is no consciousness, there is just nothing that is everything. And everything which is nothing. And the same with the I am. Like I use the I am now because after years and years of teaching, like that's what people are used to, but the I am doesn't really exist. And the consciousness, they're not really separate things. It is no thing and everything. It's this beingness, this aliveness, this presence. So Waking up is an energetic shift from being contracted to not being contracted. This may or may not shift the person. More than likely will change the person, but it's certainly going to not make it perfect. Because what is perfect and what is right and wrong? I really feel the way in which we think right is, and we think that society should be, and we think what fairness is, I really don't think it is. I think there's so much more happening that we can't perceive. So many more energies and dynamics happening. Nice. But we now take some questions.